this word of encouragement is for a few different people. This is a word of encouragement for those who are weary. Maybe you are just really weighed down by life right now. This is also a word of encouragement for those who are feeling a little ambivalent. Maybe you're like, I don't feel tired, I don't feel great, I'm just kind of blah today. This is also a word for you. And this is also a word for the person that is just ready. You are ready to jump into what God has for you. You feel like you're in the starting blocks. This is also a word for you. And so speaking of being in the starting blocks, I want to talk a little bit about running and being a track athlete. So I want to read the room. Who here is a runner or a track star, or you are just an athlete in general? Who here is in that field? All right, we see some. Yes, I know Dr. Love. All right, sounds good. Now, who here is like me, and there is no shame in this? You are not a runner. You are, I see my mom, yes. It takes a lot to even get outside to get a workout in. That is me too. There is no shame in that. All right, well, I'm going to tell you a story today about my first track meet. I'm not a runner, I am a writer, but I didn't realize that till a little bit later in life. But when I was a senior in high school, I decided I was going to go out for the track team. I was like, you know what, it's my final year, go big or go home, let's just have a little fun. So my sister, who's sitting right here, she is a really good athlete. She's an amazing track star. She has lots of awards and medals and all of that stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'm tall like her, I have some decent speed, maybe I can do this too. So the first track meet came and I was super excited, like, all right, let's get into things. And I was told that I was going to be running the 4x4. And so the day comes and I'm feeling anxious, but I'm feeling ready, like I can do this. And then my track coach comes to me and he says, okay, Natalie, I want you to be the anchor in this race. Now, if you're unfamiliar with track terminology, the anchor is the last person to run in this relay. So the first person, it's their job to really make sure that they get momentum, kind of create somewhat of a lead. And the second and third people, their job is to keep the pace going. They don't really have to create too much more distance. They can. They should if they can, but if they can't, just kind of keep the pace going. And then it's the anchor's job to bring it home. So there's some pressure on you, like, come on, you got to pick up any slack, let's finish and finish strong. So when my coach told me this, I was excited, but I was also a little bit terrified, like, oh boy, this is a big job, but I think I can do it. So as I'm getting ready, I'm just repeating all these verses, like Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and mind over matter, Natalie, you can do it, just leave it all on the field. And so the time comes for the race. You know, our team is doing okay, we're not in first place, but we're doing decent. And I'm thinking to myself, I can do this, I'm going to take this thing home. So I start the race and I'm going as fast as I can and I'm giving it my all. And I'm feeling good. I beat the person that's in front of me, but there's still another competitor before me. So I'm like, okay, Natalie, just a little bit more. Just push, just push, just push. And I remember telling myself this as I'm getting a little bit closer to the first place person. And then something very tragic happened. I fell. Right on my face in front of the entire arena, I just fell. I didn't trip. I didn't get distracted. I just fell. And there's not really a lot of time to think about what happened in that moment, so I just did what I knew to do. I got up and was like, okay, well, I still need to finish. And before I could even take 2 steps, I fell again. And I was just lying there like, what in the world is going on? And I was so weak, I was so embarrassed that my mom and my other track coach, they had to come and carry me off the field. And I write this in the book, I felt like they carried my shame and embarrassment with me. And I remember just being so confused because like I said, I didn't trip, I didn't get distracted by something else, I just fell. But I've realized sometimes life brings us to moments where we feel the same. We're running our race, we're pushing hard for something, and then all of a sudden trouble comes. Maybe it's trouble in your relationships, maybe it's trouble in your finances, your career, your ministry, your marriage, your children. Sometimes life leads us to a place, yes, where we're running, and out of nowhere we feel like we've fallen and we don't know why or what happened. I spent weeks after that track meet wondering, why couldn't my body do the thing it was supposed to do? I prepared for this moment, I trained for this moment. So why did it just give up on me? And I didn't get the answer until a few weeks later with a family friend who had been at the track meet. She was at our house and we were talking about the meet and I was just like, yeah, that was so embarrassing, but I don't know what happened. And she was like, I know what happened, Natalie. She was like, I was watching you at the track meet. She's like, while you were running, you stopped breathing. She said, I saw you, you were holding your breath, and I tried to tell you, breathe, Natalie, breathe, but you couldn't hear me. She yelled out, "Breathe." And in that moment, I had a light bulb moment. I realized I was so determined to win my race that I completely let go of the basic principles of how to run the race well. See, whether you're a track star or not, you know that there are certain things you have to do to be a good runner. You have to have good form. I've been seeing you do this, you know. You gotta have your arms going a certain way. You gotta pick up your legs a certain way. But you also have to breathe. It sounds so simple, but it's so easy to forget when you're focused on the finish line. Breathe, Natalie, breathe. I realized in that moment that that was the same kind of mentality that I had applied to other areas of my life. In my quest to just finish things, I started striving. And in my striving, I forgot the very thing that God had equipped me with to run my race well. And today I want to ask you, where in your life do you need to take a little bit of a pause and ask yourself, what principles of life do I need to make sure I'm applying to run my race well? It's so easy to rush into things, to strive rather than to stride when we're trying to get to the finish line of our business, of our career, of our marriage, of our family, and our friendships. But sometimes God allows us to have these forced pauses, like he did with me on the track fields, where he says, hey, we need to reevaluate, and we need to re-enter the arena with a little bit of a different mindset. Because what I've realized is sometimes when we're striving, it's demonstrating a lack of trust. I know that happened with me on the track team. I didn't have trust, or I put the trust all in myself. I said, whatever happens with my teammates, I have a part to do, so I'm going to do my part. But it was a group effort. There was 4 people running the race, and there was also a principle I had to apply for my training. And the same is true of our lives as believers. We are a part of the body of Christ. There's a church. We're a team effort here. It's not just one person, it's all of us coming together and then relying on the Lord for what he's doing in us. I love how in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, Paul talks about us running a race. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. I really love this verse because I feel like Paul just breaks it down for us. Paul is telling us that we all have a race that's set before us. We all have a mission that God has given to us collectively as the body of Christ and also individually with our lives. But Paul tells us, he instructs us, if we want to run this race, there are certain things we have to do. And he gets very practical. You have to lay aside the things that are getting in your way, the things that are weighing you down. So I ask you today, what are some of the things that are weighing you down from running your race well? Is it pride? Is it fear? Is it insecurity? Is it comparison? Is it a certain sin or relationship or distraction? I can't say what yours is, but I want you to think about that. I know for me, sometimes I struggle with feeling like I just have to get there on my own. Sometimes even if I know that God is calling me into something, I can get fearful of what it will look like. So I'm like, okay, Lord, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. But God is a step-by-step God. Just like when you're running a race, you don't just leap to the finish line, it's step by step. And so through this race, but also through my life, God has had to remind me, Natalie, your trust, your dependence has to rely on me. And so I ask you, what is the thing that might be weighing you down? Evaluate that so that you can set it to the side. And then Paul tells us to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. God is the one who gave us the race to run, but he is the one that will help us complete it. And so as we're on this journey and as we're on our race, we look to him, for he is the one that is going to reveal it to us. And then we breathe, just as my Aunt Marjorie told me all those years ago. You have to breathe to run well. It sounds so simple, but it's a necessary component of running both literally, but also spiritually. So I want to invite you for a moment to literally just breathe. Just take a deep breath, in and out. Yes, let's do one more. Just feel it. There's something peaceful about that, isn't it? It's our body's natural response. It's how God naturally made us to just breathe. And what I found, I think, is that breathing is our body's first act of submission to the Lord. It's the first reminder that we're given that we are not our own, we are the Lord's. And so sometimes when I'm in the midst of finding myself starting to strive again, I have to remind myself, just breathe, Natalie. Just breathe. And so I want to invite you to do that as well this week. Take moments to just remember to breathe and lean into what God has already started in you and what God promises to finish in you, because he will. As I was preparing to speak today and getting excited to spend this time with you, I asked Dr. Love, what do you want me to talk about? And she said revival. And I got really excited when I heard that word, because I feel like that's a word I've been hearing a lot. You probably have as well. Revival, revival, revival. And whenever I start to hear something often, I begin to believe God is doing something with this word. God is doing something with this concept of revival. He's told us, he's promised us, in the final days there will be a revival. And so I got excited to really think about that and lean into that when I thought about talking with you all. And so I started doing a little bit of research. We hear that word a lot, revival, but what does it actually mean? And so the word revival literally translates to the state of being revived. It's to restore to life or consciousness someone or something. And I believe that's what God is doing with the church right now. He is restoring us back to life. He is reviving us back to life. He is awakening us. And this makes me very, very excited, because I realized something as I was thinking about this. There's a process that has to happen when you are being revived. So I recently started watching this show. My mom and sister have been watching it as well. It's called The Resident. Has anyone here seen it? Oh yes, we got some fans. When I heard that Theo from The Cosby Show was in it, I was sold. The Resident is about a group of doctors. And so, with any show where you have doctors, you're kind of thrown into the drama of the ER and life in the hospital and stuff like that. And so about once every episode, there's someone that needs to be revived. And in order to revive them, they have to do compressions. And so compressions are literally pushing on the chest, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, to bring that person back to life. And what's happening when they're doing these compressions is they are flattening by pressure or squeezing the muscles in order to keep the oxygen flowing to restore the heart. And as I was thinking about this, I began to have a revelation. You are pressing and pressing and pressing to revive the person, to restore the oxygen in their lungs, to keep them going, to keep them breathing. And I believe that's exactly what God is doing with us right now. There's a pressure that's happening, a pushing and a pressing and a pushing and a squeezing and a pressing. But it all has a purpose. God is reviving us. God is awakening us for the revival that's taking place. And so sometimes we find ourselves in these moments where God is pressing us, like me on the floor at the track meet. What in the world has happened? Or maybe right now in your business there's a pressing, or in your marriage there's a pressing, or in your family there's a pressing. And it's easy to feel these things and be like, Lord, what is going on? But how could our perspective change if we realize in the pressing God is awakening, in the pressing God is preparing us, in the pressing God is reviving us, individually and collectively for revival. So that when we wake up, there is a praise on our mouth about the only one who can revive us. That's what revival is all about. And so I want to encourage you in your pressing place, whatever it looks like. Sometimes we have these moments, these real life experiences like falling at a track meet that show us something greater spiritually. So I don't know what's going on in your life, but I would challenge you to take a look and say, God, how are you reviving me? And challenge me to see that the pressing that you are doing in my life is serving a purpose, that it's actually a very sacred space. I love in 2 Corinthians 4, verses 8 through 10, it says, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. Can I just read that one more time? We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. At the beginning of this, I talked about how God is relational. God is into being in intimacy with us, in relationship, in communion with us. And a lot of times we experience that through the pressing. God knows that the pressing hurts. He knows that it's hard. But he will also continue to do it because he knows the awakening that's happening in the process. And so I hope that that encourages us this week. Because I think a lot of us, we love the finish line moments of our lives. When you run a marathon, getting to the end. When your wedding day, finally getting to say I do to the person you love. your children graduating, you retiring. We love these moments where we can see the end of a thing and they're beautiful. But the truth is, the finish line moments, they're often few and far between. And what we really spend the majority of our time in is the middle. The preparation, the training, the back and forth, the day-to-day, the discipline, the breathing, the basic principles that help us finish and finish well. And so we must pay attention to the middle, and we must do our best to observe the middle and learn from the middle. And I think someone that teaches us that is a woman the world has been celebrating this week, Sha'Carri Richardson. Yes, so we celebrate her and her amazing accomplishment. But she would probably know more than anyone. Her true victory didn't come when she crossed the finish line and ran that race. Her true victory came every single day she decided to train. Every single day she decided to show up. Every single day she decided to work for the vision that she had for herself. And now we celebrate with her in her victory. But I'm sure she's celebrating all of the many moments that came before that. And so I want to speak to you in this room because I know that there are people in here who you are working, and you're working tirelessly behind the scenes, and maybe you feel that other people aren't seeing the work that you're doing. Maybe you feel like other people don't see the vision that you're working towards or the vision that you're pressing towards. God sees it. And in the pressing and the pushing and in the awakening, He's doing the good work. And you will get to the finish line. But don't discount the middle. There's this quote by a writer I like named Oswald Chambers. And he talks about how a lot of times as believers, we celebrate the mountaintop moments. We love the mountaintops because that's where we feel like we experience the glory of God. And it's true. There is something about being on that mountaintop that is sacred. But he goes on to say, our true experiences with the Lord, where we really get our stamina, it comes from the valley. The valley is where we experience intimacy. The valley is where we experience relationships. The valley is where we pick up others and say, hey, I'm on this race too. And we will get to the mountain. But after we get to the mountain and have that moment, we're going to go back in the valley again. And we're going to do it all over again. That is the race we are running. The mountains and the valleys, the step by step, the daily discipline, the process. It is all serving a purpose until we reach the final glory, the final finish line. So in the process, don't discount the middle. And this is the middle. It's the Bible studies and coming to church and spending time in community. It's the walks you take with your friends. It's calling your girlfriends after work. It's the prayers that you pray for your children. All of these things matter. And sometimes in the mess of day-to-day life, it can feel underwhelming. But this is where the victory lies, in showing up, in training, in preparing, and letting God compress us so that He can awaken us. And so I want to encourage you not to discount the middle. Keep breathing in the middle. Keep letting God awaken you in the middle. For there is a revival that's here and a revival that's coming. And so I started this time saying that I wanted to encourage you. And I hope that these words and these stories do just that. Because in Isaiah 43 verse 19, God tells us, behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth, do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. This verse has been just sitting on me for the last year and a half. Because I love that, the way that it just is written. I'm a writer, so I really like to get into language. And I love how this verse is just like, I'm doing a new thing. Don't you see it? It's happening right here. It's happening right now. But what I love is that there's a comparison that takes place. The verse literally says, I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And so God is calling us to observe the new life even as we observe the death. There's a way, but there's also the wilderness. There's rivers, but there's also the desert. And I just love the Lord. Can I just say that? And I love His word because I feel like God is not telling us don't ignore that. God is not telling us to ignore what's hard. God is not telling us to ignore the bad stuff. God knows that it's hard sometimes to show up in just your regular everyday life. But in the midst of it, He's saying, I'm doing a new thing. Revival is happening. Pay attention. And sometimes we see the revival most clearly when we see the boat. When we see the wilderness, but we also see the way. When we see the rivers, but we also see the desert. Right in the middle, we see what God is doing and what He is inviting us to be a part of. But to be a part of it well, to run our race well, we have to show up and apply the principles of life that God has given us. Behold, God is doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? And so as we go into this week, I want to encourage you to keep running. If you hear nothing else from me, keep running. But I want to remind you of some of the basic principles I've learned that help me do this. So there's throwing off the distractions, as Paul told us, throwing off the things that weigh us down, the sin that so easily entangles us, the hindrances of our lives. Throw those things to the side so that you can keep going, so that you can keep running. And then breathe, just as my Aunt Marjorie told me. Breathe. And sometimes it's literally as simple as that, taking a second and just breathing. Remembering that God is the one that's going to finish this thing in us. It's not us. Yes. It's not coming from our own strength. I was so encouraged this morning when he brought up humbling moments. And how sometimes we get to a place where we have to step outside of ourselves and realize, I don't have this. I do not have this. But Lord, are you available to help me? And taking just like this centurion and going to God, Jesus, help me. You are the author and the finisher of my faith. So finish this race in me. Breathe. And then I want to encourage you to call to mind the faithfulness of God, who works all things together for our good. Romans 8:28 literally tells us, and I want to make sure that I quote it exactly right. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. I went to a church once and they had a specific way that they would define the word all. They said, all means all, and that's all means.
All means all, and that's all means.
And so when I look at this verse, I'm like, okay, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. That means every single thing. Because here's the thing, sometimes we look at our lives and we can see, okay, Lord, I know you're doing a good thing, but how are you going to use that? How are you going to use that mistake? How are you going to use that time I fell? And God is like, did I say all? Or did I say all? And so I want to encourage you today, as you are running this race, to remember that God is going to use everything. The moments when you fall, the moments when you trip, the moments when you slip, the moments when you just make a flat-out mistake, God will use it all if you'll let him. Because that's his character. And just as he said, he is the author and the finisher of our faith. He knows our shortcomings. He knows our shortfalls. But in his story, in this story, he will take it and use it for your good. And I see that even in this story of the track meet. It's a small example, but it's one that really holds a lot of meaning to me because for so many years, I was so embarrassed by this situation, honestly. This was not a small little meet. There were so many schools there. All of my friends were there. My family was there. My team and my coaches were there. There were cute guys from other schools. Why? Why did you let this happen? And for years, I just would think about it sometimes and be just embarrassed. And then I remember as I was going to work on 52 Cups of Coffee, I was getting towards the end of writing this book, and I was trying to figure out the order of some of the chapters, and specifically what I would say in the first chapter. And I remember distinctly sitting in Barnes & Noble in Naperville, and God brought this story back to mind. And I just started writing and writing and writing. And when I finished, I felt God say, that will be the first chapter of your book. And it brings me chills right now as I think about this, because for me, this was a very personally embarrassing example. But isn't it funny how God can take some of the things that we feel shame and embarrassment about and say, I will use this for my glory. And so now the first thing that people read, whether they finish the whole book or not, the first chapter that they read is a word of encouragement based off of one of my most embarrassing experiences. Isn't that just like God, though? He will take the things that we wish never happened. He will take the things that we want to discount and says, I can use it. And not only will I use it, not only can I use it, I will use it for my glory, not your own, my glory. And so if you hear nothing else, I want you to keep running. But also know that as you run, there might be mistakes, there might be slip-ups, there might be embarrassing moments along the way, but God has already promised you that he will use them. He will take your story and use it for good. And so as you go into this week, I hope that you are encouraged to see the Lord as you run this race, to see your community as you run this race. This really is a relay. We're not running it by ourselves. God is going before us, but we're also all doing it together. And so I'm grateful to be a part of your journey today as you are a part of mine. And I hope that we can all encourage each other in what the Lord is doing in our lives. I want to pray for you all one more time and just thank you again for having me today. Dear Lord, I thank you for this fourth Sunday of the month. And as we close out June and enter into